The Cabinet meeting, as usual, this is being broadcast via the County Council's website and it will be archived so you can view it later. Due to the current situation, only 3 members of Cabinet are present in the room, myself, the Deputy Leader and Lee Brecken. The remaining members of the Cabinet, along with those officers presenting today, will be joining us online. Okay, yes, normal things. For those of you in the room, remember, switch your microphone off and on when you're speaking so everybody can hear. For those joining the meeting via Skype, please also remember to turn your microphone off unless you're called to speak so we don't get any feedback. So the next thing's apologies for absence, and I don't have any. So agenda item 1, minutes. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of April 2020 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Urgent items under agenda item 2, we have none. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do I have any from people in the room anyway? None. We're assuming that all members who are also members of district councils will wish to declare a personal interest in agenda item 4A regarding the financial implications of COVID, so there's no need to declare that, we're just going to record it. So if we go to agenda item 4, coronavirus impact and response of the County Council, pages 11 to 12, and then there's a supplementary reports, pages 3 to 22 and 23 to 32. We have 2 reports under this item, the first of which sets out details of the impact of coronavirus and the Council's response, and the second which concerns the rather dire financial situation. Both are supplementary reports that have been circulated to all members of the Council and are published on our website. Can we note we've received comments from Terry Einon, leader of the Labour Group, a copy of which is attached to the order paper mark 4, and I understand she will want to ask a supplementary question. Would I take that first, Chief, or second? Okay, I'll take you in a bit then, Terry. Our first report will be presented by various chief officers, but first we have the Deputy Chief Exec, which is Tom. So over to you, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and hopefully my video's turned on as well now. The report provides a comprehensive overview of the local response to the pandemic and preparations for recovery from the crisis. I'm going to provide an update on several aspects before handing over to colleagues who will update you on some specific challenges and the work of their services, and also on plans for recovery. As stated at paragraphs 38 and 39, the response across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland continues to be coordinated by the Local Resilience Forum, with a Gold Command group chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable overseeing that work. That's now meeting weekly and is overseeing a huge amount of activity being undertaken in a large number of topic-specific groups and cells, and an updated version of the response structure showing those cells is attached as Appendix A on page 17. There continues to be a focus on some of the critical challenges around PPE, testing, shielding of the vulnerable, and increasingly on recovery. The Council's own response arrangements are summarised at paragraphs 40 to 41, with the Crisis Management Group and Resilience Planning Group continuing to meet at least 3 times each week, with both of them doing that. And regular updates are being provided to the leader, to lead members, to the cabinet, and all members as set out in paragraph 41, together with electronic updates. And the 17th of those updates was sent out yesterday. Some data is now beginning to emerge regarding the local economic impact. Information on unemployment in Leicestershire was released by the Office for National Statistics on Wednesday, and that information is summarised at paragraph 13. I mean, what that shows is a doubling of job seeker allowance claimants in the county between March and April, broadly reflecting the trend in the sub-region, the region and nationally. The claimant rate is now 0.4%, so that remains low, but it has doubled and is at the highest rate since summer 2018, and we can anticipate that that will continue to rise, I think. The bulk of claimants, certainly the bulk of new claimants, are in what are categorised as elementary professions and in sales and customer services, and we'll obviously keep an eye on how develops as new data emerges. Paragraph 74 towards the end of the report refers to the work of the business cell in the LRF, which is leading work on the economic recovery, and obviously will be taking account of that sort of data as it comes through. Moving to paragraph 37, the Local Resilience Forum has continued to work to ensure that there was appropriate and sensitive handling of the increased numbers of deaths being experienced. And I've reported previously on the provision of additional mortuary capacity, and it remains the case that the area currently has adequate capacity to deal with an increased number of deaths should that come to pass, in relation to, for example, there being a reasonable worst case scenario situation developing. So that's in a good situation locally because of some of the steps that have been taken. I'm now going to briefly summarise the issues which are covered from paragraph 62 in the report up to the end of the report. On paragraph 62, on recycling and household waste sites, an online booking system for county residents went live on Thursday the 14th of May, and by the end of this Tuesday just past had received 8,000 bookings. 7 sites opened on Monday. 5 of those sites operated well throughout the day. 2 of them at Whetstone and Oadby did experience queuing, and actions have been taken to adjust those 2 operations, and since then there has been much less queuing. There was a problem with the online booking system, which required it to be taken offline on Monday. That issue was rectified and was back online on Tuesday afternoon, and didn't really impact on bookings that had already been made for the week ahead. Given the short timescales to have the sites operational and to implement a new booking system, the reopening has gone relatively positively, and there has been positive media coverage. The team is continuing to monitor and fine-tune the arrangements, and new booking slots are being released on a rolling weekly basis. So I'm just trying to find my notes. Moving on to paragraphs 63 to 64, and those provide an update on funding allocated by the government to improve provision for walking and cycling, to shift capacity from public transport and to enable social distancing. More information is awaited on that funding and on any associated guidance. And work in the meantime is underway to review current strategies and work with partners through the LRF to develop appropriate measures, particularly in each of the market towns. A brief update from the Planning, Historic and Natural Environment team is provided at paragraphs 65 and 66, including to report that the Development Control and Regulatory Board held its first virtual meeting yesterday. On regulatory services, the registration of births remains suspended, and discussions are ongoing with the General Register Office in relation to the resumption of birth registrations and also small marriage / civil partnership ceremonies, potentially from the 1st of June. As you can imagine, there will be a significant backlog of registrations and ceremony hearings, so those will need to be picked up as part of the recovery process. The Trading Standards Service continues to focus also on reducing the threat of COVID-19 related scams, and also offers product safety technical support to the PPE procurement process to make sure that PPE that we receive and procure is of the appropriate standard. On legal services, paragraphs 69 to 72 summarise changes to court hearing arrangements and issues arising from adjournments, including possible development of a backlog of complex hearings, and also notes that a revised process for online school appeal hearings commences on the 1st of June. Paragraph 73 provides a very brief update on VE Day recently. And finally from me, paragraph 75 reports on the successful allocation of the £1.5 million which was set aside by Cabinet to provide support to communities. 159 voluntary community and social enterprise organisations have benefited from this funding, and members of the public can follow the link in the report to find out more about how that funding has been distributed. So I'll hand over at this point to the Director of Public Health, Mike Sands, to provide an update on the health aspects.
Okay, there we go, just waiting for my video to start there. Hopefully that has now happened. There we go. Right, so I'm going to start by setting out the health position in paragraph 7 to 12, which sets out latest health position in Leicestershire. Obviously the figures were correct at the time the paper was written, but those numbers have moved on again. And as of last night, there were 1,207 cases in lab-confirmed cases in Leicestershire. Since the last Cabinet meeting, the number of weekly cases has decreased appreciably, although in the last 2 to 3 weeks, the decrease has plateaued and has been running at a fairly stable rate of about 100 new cases a week. It remains the position that, as per paragraph 8, Leicestershire's rate remains below the East Midlands and national averages and broadly in line with other East Midlands counties. I shan't update those figures in paragraph 9 on district numbers of cases, other than to note that, although not statistically significant at this stage, Oakley and Wigston and Hinckley and Bosworth have appreciably higher rates per head of population compared to the other districts of Leicestershire. The paper then goes on to look at the latest death data. So the Office for National Statistics, ONS, produces weekly data that comes out on a Tuesday for counts of deaths from COVID-19 by location. Paragraph 11 sets out the latest figures from the ONS, which were published on Tuesday. And that shows there have been a total of 349 deaths in Leicestershire, 46 of those coming in the last reporting week, which would have been deaths up to May the 9th, registered by May the 16th. Of note would be that of the 349, 32%, 112 of that total have occurred within care homes. Moving on to the resumption of contact tracing, which I think nationally is now known as Test and Trace. Paragraph 12 says that we believe that contact tracing for the initial lab-confirmed cases, so not this app that's being developed, would resume in mid to late May through a national contact tracing service. Work, I think, is well underway in establishing that national contact tracing service through the recruitment of some tens of thousands of contact tracers, which will operate nationally. But the start date for that has been pushed back to early June, I believe. It's obvious, I think, that local government will have a key role to play in using the data that comes from contact tracing to establish if there are any local outbreaks in different settings. Could be a factory, sports stadium, school, wherever, or indeed in the wider population, and manage the outbreaks as appropriate locally. So it's a welcome recognition of the role that local government can play in helping control the virus. Moving on to the section on PPE. The situation regarding PPE has eased somewhat in the last month. Availability of PPE remains fluid. And there is a continuing need for close monitoring of stock levels and communication with providers, as set out in paragraph 16. The Council, I think, has got a really good, robust handle on the needs of care homes, domiciliary providers, and is able to respond to those as appropriate when they are in need. But overall, there are far fewer care homes and domiciliary providers reporting supply issues than previously, and certainly the last time the Cabinet met. As part of wider local resilience forum work, the County Council is modelling the worst case anticipated demand for PPE outside of the hospital setting. Obviously, as we move into partial easing of lockdown, we are expecting the demand for PPE to rise, either because we are starting back up services where PPE was previously a requirement, or because we, as on a precautionary principle, there are newly introduced COVID-19 related measures around PPE that we need to respond to. So we're just currently modelling out what the demand for PPE will be in the future. The paper then goes on to talk about the donation of 20,000 face masks from the Sichuan province in China. We reported on this in the last Cabinet update paper. The masks, which will have a variety of uses, but certainly be used to protect those who are shielded, were flown into East Midlands Airport last week, and distribution is ongoing. And lastly, in paragraph 24, That section is headed key worker testing, but clearly key worker and vulnerable group testing has been rapidly expanded over the last few weeks to include now anyone can request a test if they have symptoms, and Cabinet will be aware that those symptoms have been widened out to include things like loss of smell and loss of taste. That's available to people through the National Testing Portal, the national website, which offers a choice of testing either at drive-through sites or via a home testing kit. And the Birstall Park and Ride site remains operational as the main Leicestershire testing site, churning over about 5,000 tests a week, with the military organised programme of rolling site pop-ups, which are operational for about 3 to 4 days at a time, running throughout Leicestershire on an ongoing basis. But I'll end my section there. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. So I think you're next, John Wilson.
Thank you. I'll just wait for the video to load. There we go. So I'm just going to talk about initially care home testing. So following on from Mike around key worker testing, as Cabinet members will be aware, until recently testing in care homes have been quite limited, particularly through Public Health England, testing the first 1 to 2 residents of an outbreak, and also for hospitals to test people prior to admission to care homes. Members may be aware that that's now being rolled out nationally so that all care home residents and staff can be tested. And there is a national programme, so care homes can request testing for their residents through the national portal, and test kits will be sent to the care homes to swab their residents, and staff can do the same, and tests will be sent to their home addresses if they request a test. In addition to that, local authorities can prioritise testing for care homes, and so together with colleagues in the Public Health Department, we have been prioritising care homes for testing, and we've written to all care homes to identify those care homes that require a test, and we'll be looking to, in addition to the national criteria, which will be around subsequent testing for care homes that have declared an outbreak, so where Public Health England go in, test the first 1 or 2 people. Locally, we will then test the remaining care home residents and staff. And in addition to that, any care home or large care home of over 50 beds is a priority nationally. But locally, we're also wanting to prioritise those care homes where we know that there are staff isolating. So they may not be confirmed, but they are isolating. We think it's important due to the issues around asymptomatic infection rates that we test those staff, but also any care homes where there may have been a previous outbreak, so we'd want to go back in and retest staff and residents to ensure there's no follow-up infection or transmission or asymptomatic transmission. So that's what we're doing in terms of local testing for care homes. I'll just talk briefly now about shielding and protecting vulnerable people. Since the last Cabinet report, there's been a significant increase in the numbers of people who require shielding. So nationally, the numbers have gone from 1.3 million people to 2.2 million people on the shielding list. And for Leicestershire, that now means that we have 23,700 people who are required to shield as part of the national shielding campaign. So of those 23,000 people, 13,000 have registered for support. So that includes 5,000 people who have registered for support in obtaining essential supplies, and over 1,000 people who are saying that they need help with basic care needs. The County Council supported over 9,000 people by direct contact, and again the district councils have also contacted over 6,000 people. As of the last week, paragraph 33 of the report details that we've now had over 19,000 deliveries of government food parcels in Leicestershire. And in addition to those deliveries, the County Council has delivered 230 emergency food parcels. It's important to note that the shielding work, shielding of vulnerable people, is likely to continue for some time. We think it may continue for at least to the end of this year. Because obviously there will be further outbreaks and further infection rates, and we'll need to shield people for some time to come. So we are considering how the County Council can continue to shield and protect people as we go forward. I think that's all I need to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's over to you now, Jay Moore.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. Morning, sorry. So if I can start with schools, the plans for the wider reopening of schools have now been set out by government. So settings are being asked to prepare for early years, foundation, years 1, 6, 10 and 12 to begin to return from the 1st of June. And the government is also asking special schools to begin to consider the return of a wider group of children across all phases. There's been a range of guidance issued by the Department for Education to support schools in developing these plans, including a range of protective measures that need to be undertaken. So the local authority is working closely with schools and supporting them where needed to welcome that wider group of children back. And in line with the DfE guidance, schools across Leicestershire will make decisions on an individual basis, following a risk assessment about how and when this will happen. So if I can move to children's social care and targeted early help. So staff across the department are continuing to support children across Leicestershire, and particularly in providing services to those children who are most vulnerable. One of the particular groups of children that the department is continuing to support are young carers. We're working very closely with Barnardo's, who undertake an assessment of the needs of those young carers, and in order to provide support where this is needed. And obviously this will include understanding the impact of COVID-19 and what impact that's having for those children, as well as the impact on their education, to ensure that they're not falling behind and indeed are getting the support they require. And thank you. I'll hand over to Chris Lewis, who's going to cover recovery.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, all. Chair, the sections on, let me just make sure my video is starting. Yep. The sections of this paper relating to recovery cover a number of areas, and through these sections, there's always one eye on the production of the County Council's recovery strategy, which will shortly be shared in draft form with senior officers. It also links back to the anticipated need to recast our transformation ambitions in light of this pandemic. Within the early recovery sections, I think 42 to 44, we seek to help define the recovery term, recognising it relates primarily to major incident management, which we are more accustomed to taking place over a shorter period of time than for this pandemic. The paper goes on to relate the language of recovery to the current pandemic, pointing out that recovery in this context will not only refer to getting services back up and running, but will require the County Council to define a new business as usual for the future, addressing the many impacts, particularly relating to finances and well-being, that will influence our recovery efforts for some time to come. This will be picked up within the recovery strategy, along with timescales for longer-term service planning, alongside, for example, the production of a new MTFS. To ensure we have member involvement throughout the recovery process, sections 45 and 46 refer to proposed terms of reference for a cross-party working group, and they are attached as Appendix B on page 19, for which we're seeking Cabinet approval. It's proposed that the group will act in an advisory capacity and supplement the existing governance and decision-making arrangements for the County Council. The necessary infrastructure for recovery is now in place within the Council, summarised in sections 51 to 53, with officers across support services providing advice and guidance for service recovery and linking directly into service departments. This group also links across to the multi-agency work of the Local Resilience Forum to ensure we're coordinating our recovery alongside that of our partners. Much of their current work is supporting the immediate consideration of service recovery planning in light of government guidance and the Council's short-term recovery principles. This is contained within paragraphs 54 onwards. These principles relate specifically to the safety of our staff, visitors and service users, including the application of social distancing and the need for PPE, etc., the availability and utilisation of our office space, and the need to control our finances to avoid any unnecessary expenditure. It's worth pointing out, as we have already heard, that many of the Council services haven't stopped during the pandemic, but have had to quickly adapt to new working conditions, new responsibilities, and new service delivery methods. It's probably fair to say that the starting point for recovery is therefore different across our services. And finally, alongside our recovery work contained within sections 57 to 58, we'll be refreshing our transformation portfolio to understand and implement longer-term changes that will be necessary across our services. We'll be reviewing our ways of working programme, recasting our savings requirements, and ensuring that we identify opportunities to optimise digital technology through recovery and into service access and design for the future. We'll also seek to ensure our recovery and long-term transformation considers alternatives to returning to high energy consumption in line with our environmental and carbon commitments. That, I think, summarises and takes us to the end of the paper. So with your permission, Chair, I'll go back and look at the recommendations contained on page 3. Specifically, that the Cabinet is asked to note the actions taken in response to COVID-19. We'd like to convey our thanks to the Sichuan Provincial People's Government for its donation of 20,000 face masks, and really, finally, noting the work that has commenced on recovery and approving the establishment of a cross-party working group within the terms of reference set out in Appendix B. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And subsequent to receiving the masks, I have written to Sichuan to thank them very much for the masks. I've also done a radio interview thanking them for the masks. I also want, before we take Terry, thank Terry, leader of the Labour Group, and Simon, leader of the Liberal Democrats, for agreeing to the establishment of the cross-party working group. So, first of all, Terry, I think you wanted to ask a supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. Briefly, I understand that, and certainly councillors understand, because we've had clear update 17, making it quite clear that we are actually on the same page as Sir Peter Soulsby, leader of the City Council, regarding the opening of schools, and that safety is paramount, and that the 1st of June is a not before date. And though we are clear of that, I think that parents and teachers and certainly the unions could do with some clarity. And would it be possible for this council to produce a similar public statement to reassure them of these points? Thank you, Chair.
Ivan, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I attended the Leicestershire Education Excellence Partnership yesterday, and there were many head teachers taking part. Obviously, we want children to go back to school as soon as it is safe to do so. We need to remember that 230 schools have been open throughout the coronavirus pandemic, taking in the children of critical workers and those who might be vulnerable. So, in line with the DFE guidance, schools will make decisions on an individual basis following a risk assessment about how and when this will happen, and the local authority will provide support where needed. We know that a number of schools in Leicestershire are planning to open to wider groups of pupils from the 1st of June based on plans set out in the light of risk assessments. Schools are extending their opening when school leaders and governors are clear that all actions possible have been taken to make them safe for children, families and staff.
Thank you, Ivan. I've got Trevor next. Trevor?
Thank you. What I'd like to add to that is that it's a particularly tricky time, I understand, and of course the choice for parents is whether or not they will send their offspring or bring their offspring to school, or in fact whether they will transport them. And I fully appreciate that consideration. I think we really do need to look at this closely, and I'd like to suggest that we bring to Environment and Transport Scrutiny Committee in September a full report on that, Leader.
Thank you very much. Have we got any other speakers? No, we haven't. So it falls to me to move the motion on the Green Order paper, which is that we note the actions taken to date in response to COVID-19. Thanks be conveyed to Sichuan People's Government for its donation of 20,000 face masks, and see that the work has commenced on recovery be noted, and the establishment of the cross-party working group with the terms of reference set out in Appendix B be approved. I'll move.
I'll second, Leader.
Yes, go ahead, Lee.
Sorry, can I just make a comment if I can, Chairman? As lead member for health, can I just thank all officers and staff for all of the work in these exceptional and unprecedented times. All members have been kept up to date at all times and are well informed, which we are being very grateful for. As a county, the number of week-on-week confirmed cases has now slowed, and out of the 1,207 confirmed cases, there have been 349 deaths due to COVID-19. As a Cabinet and as a Council, we send our condolences to all those families who have been affected by their loss, and we also thank all the residents of Leicestershire who continue to take self-isolation steps to control the spread. Be assured that Leicestershire County Council is heavily involved in recovery plans to provide direction and with a political perspective. Be assured also that Leicestershire County Council is working hard for all of the residents of Leicestershire. I'm happy to second the recommendations on the order paper for item A.
Yes, thank you for that, Lee. I'd got you down that you wanted to second, and I asked Blake, so sorry about that. So I'll call people in order to say for or against. So the first person, Blake, is I'm going to call you for or against.
For, Leader.
Richard Blunt.
For.
Don't need to call Lee. Ivan.
For.
Trevor.
For.
Louise.
For.
Byron.
For.
And the other Richard.
For.
Thank you. So that's everybody in favour. Thank you very much. So now if we move on to the next agenda item, which is the second report on coronavirus, which sets out details of our financial situation. Chris Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources, will present the report, and then I'll go to Byron, who has responsibility for finance, to speak. So over to you, Chris Tambini.
Okay, thank you, Leader. If I start by just setting out the financial implications, the County Council does provide regular monitoring information to central government, the so-called Delta returns, and the table in paragraph 8 shows the latest information. So overall, we think there's going to be a lot of income, extra spending pressures in the region of 56 million. We've already received 2 sets of grant which total 28 million, so the unfunded pressure is in the order of £28 million as we speak. Paragraph 9 kind of sets out a bit more detail the reasons for the impact. Given the previous report, I don't intend to go through that in any great detail. So I think you've heard in terms of where the extra spending pressures have materialised. But I'll just make a couple of comments. There's clearly the biggest pressure is around extra expenditure in terms of adult social care, and I will say a few words on that a little bit later. But there's also extra costs around recovery, around the cost of providing services within a socially distanced kind of environment. We put a notional £5 million within the forecast for that, but we clearly in the process of working through the actual costs for individual services. The second one I'll make comment on is a loss of income. Our largest element of income is council tax and business rates, and that's nearly £400 million. We've worked on the basis that is going to reduce.
Chris, we've lost you. Can you cure it, Kat?
In the current
Chris,
we've got to take a significant amount out of the county funds and contingencies, and we're going to also have to reprioritise the capital programme. I envisage we'll do.
Chris, can you hear us? Chris?
Hello?
Chris, we lost you completely, so you're going to have to rewind about 3 minutes.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, but you'll have to go back, say, a couple of minutes, Chris, because you just blanked out.
Okay. If I go back to... Did you hear the financial impact, Leader?
I think so, Chris. So go back to about there. You started on financial impact, then we lost you.
Yep. Apologies. So the The financial impact after taking account of government grant is a net unfunded pressure of £28 million. Paragraph 9 kind of sets out a bit more detail in terms of the reasons for the pressures, and I don't intend to go through that in any great detail given the previous report. Just say a couple of comments. There's clearly extra expenditure pressures, particularly around adult social care, and there are some extra costs around recovering services, providing services in a socially distanced way. We've put in a notional £5 million for that, but we're clearly in the process of working through the actual costs for each individual service. One of the biggest pressures is going to be loss of income. In total, between council tax and business rates, that's nearly £400 million worth of income for the county council. At the moment, we've put a notional £10 million reduction in terms of those income streams. We need to work through with the districts to get a far more accurate figure, and we're in the process of doing that. So I'm hoping the next return we'll be able to give something a little bit more accurate. And I must admit, I do fear that £10 million will increase. But based on the scenario I've kind of painted, I suppose the good news is that we can balance in the current year, but it will involve a significant take from the county fund, and it will also involve reprioritising the capital programme. I envisage we'll bring back the capital programme to Cabinet in September, and also at that stage as well, we can take it through scrutiny, and I think that will involve some kind of very difficult decisions. So that's the short-term impact. We've also got major concerns over the medium term. I mean, I think most people are aware that we're in recession at the moment, and that will be a further impact in terms of our income, and also generally when we have a recession, there is an increased demand for many of our services, particularly around social care. The Cabinet is familiar with the various mitigations we've put in place, and we've repeated them in paragraph 14 of this report. Given those mitigations, actually, I think they're extremely unlikely to fully mitigate that extent of that gap. And paragraphs 15 and 16 do set out some of the asks from government. I mean, top of the list is clearly asking for more funding from central government. But I think equally important, and this is an ask that the County Council network has put to the fore, is really some kind of income guarantee around council tax and business rates. And if we got that, I think that would be a really big step forward. There's a certain inevitability that this crisis is going to push some authorities into severe financial difficulties, and there's also some evidence that individual authorities are contacting MHCLG. And so the plea in this report is for MHCLG to take more of a strategic approach to that, possibly looking at the structure of local government rather than making a series of tactical decisions in terms of the pressures faced by individual authorities. I'd also remind members that this was always going to be a challenging financial year. We've clearly got pressures in adult social care and children's social care, but probably our biggest pressure is around special education needs. And we're still forecasting a deficit in the order of £20 million by the end of this financial year. And we are dependent on DFE actually coming up with some revised kind of guidance. There was a review of SEN, which was due to have an interim report at Christmas and a final report at Easter.
Chris, we've lost you again. Chris, we lost you again there.
I was just talking about the other pressures we've got around SEN and adults and children's social care, and saying that the SEN pressures are really dependent on some national changes from the government in terms of change regulations, and a review that's currently in progress. The review was due to report at Christmas in terms of an interim report with a final report at Easter. That hasn't happened. We think the review is ongoing, but the delay is not helping our financial position, given that we're anticipating a £20 million deficit at the end of this financial year. Before I sum up, I just wanted to say something around the care sector. Nationally, the care sector has indicated that local authorities have not supported the sector adequately. Personally, I believe that's unfair. For the record, this report sets out the comprehensive package we made available within Leicestershire. We will also shortly be allocating the the additional 6.7 grant we were notified of at the end of last week. There's a bit more information within the report. It's all around providing support for infection control within care homes and home care. And we'll probably be announcing further detail of exactly how that will be allocated next week. In terms of just summing up, the County Council went into this crisis with sound finances, and even for us this is going to be a massive challenge. Despite that, I do remain confident that if we do get some extra money from the government, we will manage it, but I think that it's going to be a particularly tough few years coming up. The recommendations are set out on the order paper.
Thank you, Chris. Byron?
Yes, Leader. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Is it okay?
Yes.
Right. Well, I think the director has set out the big picture very well, so I won't go over that. But what I will want to say is now we are looking at a situation this year where we need another £28 million from the government to match the roughly 28 million we've already had, which would put us back on course again. But of course, we're expecting considerably increased costs flowing over into next year, and maybe longer than that, depending on how this coronavirus pandemic goes. Now, clearly, although we're in a better position than other councils, we're not in an ideal position, and we've got to adjust many of our programmes. So it will be, we are looking at the capital programme, we'll be looking at many other things, including our service offers as well. We'll have to do that too, if the financial position isn't repaired by the government. One of the important features is the collection of taxes, which is of course done on our behalf by the district councils. So we're pushing them very hard to get an update for them about how it's going and what their forecasts are of the collection rates and what the default position may be. And that will have a very material effect on our finances next year, although possibly a lesser one this year. The recommendations are set out on the audit paper. They address that point, and also particularly the point that we should approach our members of parliament to see what they can do to help us. We've already done that, and a letter has gone off to them, joint letter between you, Leader, and myself, and let's hope they react positively to that and provide us some help. So that's the position, and as I say, I move the clauses in the recommendations and commend it to the cabinet.
Yeah, thank you. Byron, while we've been on this meeting, I've actually had an email in from Alicia suggesting a call to discuss the best way forward, the one you sent out, the short, sharp one on finances. So after this meeting, I'll make further contact with her. So can I ask Richard Shepherd next?
Thank you, Chairman. I second what Byron has proposed. It's been said very clearly by him and by Chris Tambini. Of all the points they've made, I'll just emphasise, if I may, the importance of getting our MPs to lobby hard on our behalf to government. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded. Before I call people to vote, Chris, can you just say a little bit more about how, in my view, generously we've treated care homes in Leicestershire, when a lot of the complaints that I've heard on the TV are not reflective of what we've been doing here? Yeah, I mean, the immediate thing we did was we had a 10% kind of fee uplift. I think that's the one of the big things we've done. We've also changed the way in which we pay them. So we used to pay them in arrears, we now pay them in advance, and we've also guaranteed a level of income for them. So we've done a number of things. What we're doing on a monthly basis is reviewing that package, and we're getting some external help in to actually kind of review the actual pressures that the care sector, not just care homes, but also home care providers are facing. And we're going to kind of, I suppose, model our future support package based on the evidence received back from those consultants. That's very good, Chris, because to be honest, I've not heard any complaints from Leicestershire care home operators. It's just been the big national ones where the complaints I've heard on the television. So I'm happy that we've done our best in Leicestershire. So it was moved by Byron and seconded by Richard. So I'll just call people in order, either for or against. So the first person I've got is Blake.
4.
Richard?
4, Chairman.
Lee?
4.
Ivan?
4.
Trevor?
4.
Louise?
4.
Byron?
4.
And the other Richard?
4.
Okay, that's everybody in favour, so we can move on. We now come to Country Parks and Open Spaces Strategy 2019 to 2029. These are on pages 13 to 42. It seeks approval for the strategy for the years I've mentioned. Online we've got Roderick O'Connor, Assistant Director, Commercial and Customer Services, and Richard Hunt, Head of Country Parks and Estates. So Roderick's going to take us through the report, and then I'll be calling Byron. So over to you, Roderick.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, all. I will take us through the report, but then I would like our newly appointed Head of Country Parks, Richard Hunt, to give us a brief update once I've done that. And Chair, as the report and as the strategy and action plan have been through Cabinet previously and subsequently been to Environment and Scrutiny Commission, I'm very happy to take any questions at the end, but I won't be delving into either the strategy or the action plan. The report is actually a report of the Director of Corporate Resources, and the purpose of this report is to advise the Cabinet on the outcome of the consultation on the draft strategy. The recommendations are that the comments of the Scrutiny Commission on the draft strategy, which are in section 27, are noted, and that the Country Parks and Open Spaces strategy be approved. If I just take us down to paragraphs 6, 7 and 8 and really just summarize those, I think an important element that is contained within the strategy is that the Country Parks strategy underpins many other strategies of the County Council: communities, health and well-being, and perhaps most notably environment. And although Councillor Rhodes is the lead member for Corporate Resources, and he has written the foreword, he actually suggested to me yesterday that it might make sense to have joint representation with Councillor Blake Payne in there as well, as Councillor Payne is the lead member for Environment. And I think it's really important going forward that the Country Park strategy isn't seen in isolation, but is seen as a main tenet of the Council's environment strategy. If I go to paragraph 10, I think it is worth talking about the finances. The Country Parks and Open Spaces strategy is aligned with the Council's medium-term financial strategy. The Director, Mr Tambini, has pointed out the subsequent challenges that we'll be facing following COVID-19. I think it's worth looking at the figures in paragraph 12 and 13. In 18-19, 770,000 was the expenditure. This was defrayed by 440,000 income, with a net cost of 330,000. Our strategy has always been prefaced with the desire to make the country parks wash their own faces. And we had forecast that as a result of the strategy, the overall net cost of country parks would be forecast to fall to 150,000 by 2023-24. Following COVID, that will probably need to be reviewed. If I just go to paragraph 18 and keep it simple, 17 and 18, although parks and open spaces are enjoyed by many, they're not a statutory service. So I think it is important that we actually have beneath our strategy a foundation for getting income through car parking, through events, whenever that will be possible, so that they can in fact pay for their ongoing maintenance. And the overall vision for the parks is a simple one: to have great parks that improve the quality of life for Leicestershire's communities and visitors. I think my final point before handing over to Richard, is to look at paragraphs 24 and 25. It would be difficult not to, but we've given some consideration to the impact of COVID-19 on the strategy, and clearly they are mixed. But as lockdown is released, we will start to return slowly to normality. But it will take time for country parks to return to the previous level of activity. And although we have now opened the car parks, we still have closed off playgrounds, toilets, and other facilities. So if I can hand over to Richard, and then perhaps we'll take questions, Chair.
Go ahead, Richard. I think this is your first time here, isn't it? So welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is. I thought it would be good to perhaps share with members something of how the country park strategy translates into the action plan and into the activities that we will see around parks over the next few years. Members will see that with the strategy having its vision of great parks that improve the quality of life for Leicestershire's communities and visitors, there are various priority themes. And the first of those is that we will have a network of safe and accessible parks. Members will certainly see within the next year or so developments around our honeypot sites at Beacon Hill, where we get the highest number of visitors within the county going to that fantastic site there, which is closely linked to the country parks around it, including Broombriggs Farm. And so we will be working with partners over the next year to improve the car parking at Broombriggs so they can have a greater capacity using that site as well as Beacon Hill, but also improving the accessibility around the Broombriggs site so more people can get onto the top of the Broombriggs Farm site and enjoy the stunning views across the county from that country park. We're also planning future developments at Watermead Country Park to improve the interpretation and the waymarking, as well as looking at providing cafe and toilet facilities on that very much loved site, and making sure that as many people as possible can enjoy that. But whilst I've talked a lot about the destination parks, it's important to say that we're not forgetting what we've classed as secondary parks within the strategy. And so within our action plan, we've committed to working with the community in Moira and Donisthorpe around a future for Sarah's Wood and the toilet and the cafe block there, making sure that that is a facility which is much loved by the local community and that we can get more people using it with better facilities available on site. To develop a bit more some of the points that Roderick's just made around the importance of linking everything we're doing with the environment strategy, the second priority theme is around making sure that the biodiversity, heritage and landscape values of our parks are conserved and developed. Members who have a chance to take their daily exercise over towards the west of the county might like to at some point visit Market Bosworth Country Park, where it will be possible to see the two new pasture fields that we've incorporated within the boundary now of the country park site. This provides not only improved access for visitors to that site, but also means that we will be able to start to rewild some of that area. So building wildflower meadows and changing some of the planting around that area so that it can develop the environment strategy and improve the biodiversity there. And we'll be doing more work with our colleagues in Environment and Transport, and also with organisations such as the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust and others, to make sure we're improving the amount of surveying of wildlife that we're doing within our country park sites. There's been some really productive signs of the return of wildlife to certain sites due to some of the activities that rangers have undertaken in terms of their environmental management practices, and we'll be continuing that. It's one of the interesting elements of having experienced lockdown with far fewer people accessing country parks, that we're seeing wildlife in places where we didn't see wildlife before. And so there's definitely elements of that we will really want to see continue in the future, and it will change probably how we will approach the management of certain areas of certain parks. We're also committing as a priority theme to having more widespread engagement of citizens and communities in our parks, and we'll be setting up far more volunteering opportunities in parks and also friends groups in our parks to encourage local people to have their say in helping us to manage those parks and develop activities within those parks. We will also be seeing the development of park runs at a number of our parks later this year, once park run is again permitted, which will be a great way for people to improve their health and well-being within a beautiful country parks setting. We also talk about a sustainable financial model for growth within our parks. And a really good example of that is the developments that we're currently undertaking at Snibston on the country park site there. Members will be aware of the developments there, which will be leading to new mountain bike trails, which we hope will be a considerable draw for not only visitors within the Colville and Northwest Leicestershire area, but also right across the county and further afield into the East Midlands to come and enjoy the mountain bike trails for all the family there, alongside the new cafe facilities, which will help ensure the sustainability of that site, and building on the cafe provision that we've already got at Beacon Hill, which is proving incredibly popular with visitors to Beacon Hill. We're also having a new website for country parks coming online this year, making us much more agile and able to sell the opportunities for events and activities and things within parks and encourage more visitors to come to them. And a key part of the strategy is about how we work with national funders to bring investment into our parks, and conversations have started with those funders and will continue once the funding situation becomes a bit clearer as COVID-19 plays itself through. So I'm going to hand now back to Roderick.
Roderick, do you want anything else to say?
No, I think it's time to pass over to Councillor Rhodes, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I do, I want to say that over in Northwest, obviously we've got good parks which are ours. We've also got the National Forest, and one of the things which we're particularly good at, and if you go walking in other counties, they're not so good, is the way we've marked out our public rights of way. They've been very, very busy during this lockdown. So when you're going out walking, they really are well marked, and we should celebrate that, because I think we must have spent a lot of money on it over the years, but it really is excellent. You can look at them on a map and you can actually see, the yellow posts to follow the rights of way. It's something that we ought to note. So can I call Byron first, and I'm going to go to Blake.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Well, first of all, I'm happy to move the recommendations on the audit paper. What you have in front of you there in the extremely good report which has been put together, and let me commend both Roderick and our new manager Richard Hunt on this. They've done an outstanding job, and particularly I will commend those who contributed to that, especially the photographers, because there's some wonderful photographs in that report which make it a very, very attractive document to go through and to read, and I commend people to do that. Also, I'm very pleased to be working alongside Blake Payne on this one. He has the overall responsibility for the environment, and the country parks will be a component of the development of that policy. I'm sure he'll have more to say to that when he speaks in a moment. What we have in front of us is something which is now a fresh importance as a result of the rethinking that about much of our service offer that's gone on while the COVID crisis has been here. And although it's been very negative in many areas, in this particular area, it's given us some opportunities, and particularly, of course, it's resulted in better air quality. But it's also, as Richard pointed out, enabled wildlife to flourish in a way that it's not been able to do quite so much before. So I think we've now got a very, very firm plan in front of us now, and an opportunity for the future. And I hope that the people of Leicestershire will be pleased with what we're doing.
Thank you very much. Blake?
Thank you, Leader. Can I just join Byron in congratulating the department who've put together this strategy? There have been a couple of really good strategies. The tree management strategy came through Cabinet recently. We're now receiving this strategy, and they all underpin the environment strategy. And I think this is an example of how this authority does things differently. We are really grasping the issue here when it comes to the environment, and I pay tribute and thanks to Byron as lead member for resources for really grasping this and making resources available in spite of the dire financial situation the authority faces, because this is really important stuff for here, now and the future. The strategy as it stands needs to be economically viable and sustainable, but it needs to be environmentally sustainable. So it's probably quite pertinent today on World Biodiversity Day, I believe, that we are actually adopting this strategy, because the environmental ambition within this strategy is really, really great. Let me reassert what the authority's position is. By 2030, we want to be a net zero carbon authority. We have 13,000 tonnes of carbon emissions to reduce by then. And then by 2050, we want to follow national directive and try and contribute Leicestershire's carbon emissions and get them down to net zero too. In terms of looking after our own house and reducing our own carbon emissions, this strategy will play an immense role in doing just that by looking after the biodiversity and the plants and the trees and the fauna and flora in our parks. That will hugely contribute towards our own ambition and to become a net zero carbon authority. So can I commend the strategy? I'm very happy to second it, and can I thank Byron and his department for all the work they're putting in to supporting the environment agenda here at Leicestershire County Council.
Okay, thank you. So I have no other speakers. So it was moved by Byron and seconded by Blake. So we now just need to go through the normal stuff. So the first person, Richard, for or against?
For.
Lee?
For.
Ivan?
For.
Trevor?
For.
Louise?
For.
The other Richard?
For.
And myself, for. So that's dealt with that. Thank you very much. And can we just ask people, if they are visiting parks this weekend, to park with care in your car. Please bear in mind that people live nearby and don't park your car absolutely everywhere. Moving on to Leaders Farm Development Proposals, 43 to 56. This report advises Cabinet of the development proposals for the Leaders Farm site near Lutterworth and seeks approval for the allocation of resources to support the associated planning application, design team fees and construction costs. John Bennett, the Head of Strategic Property, will present the report, and then again I'll be going to Byron as it's his portfolio. So John Bennett, you're on.
Thank you, Leader, and good morning everybody. Good afternoon. You'll see from the recommendations on page 43 that approval is sought today to progress the deals and agree the capital budget for 2 drive-through restaurants, the building of a 50,000 square foot storage unit and 6 light industrial units totalling 27,000 square feet. By way of background, this 6.1 acre former county farm site was granted outline planning permission in 2016 for 100,000 square feet of industrial and office units. Harbour District Council was the planning authority as at the time it was envisaged that the site would be sold off for development by the private sector. Since that time, the investment fund has changed its focus to one of development for income purposes. Unfortunately, there's been no discernible light industrial or office interest in that site, other than in 2017 when a local software company expressed interest to the County Council to develop them an 18,000 square foot office HQ. As this was a development by the County Council and one that the County Council was going to hold for investment purposes, the County Council was the determining planning authority and planning permission was duly granted. Although the deal did not progress, to try and stimulate interest in the scheme and location, the estate road as permitted by that development was put in. Unfortunately, it was still not possible to garner interest in the site for any use allocated by the local plan. As is proper, we continually review the investment fund's portfolio of assets and as such started to consider other commercially viable uses for the site. Consultant advice was also sought with this regard. Whilst undertaking this review, we were approached by 2 drive-through restaurant businesses who indicated that this roadside location, just off the roundabout on the A4303, close to the M1, was an ideal location for their businesses and negotiations commenced for them to become tenants on the scheme. Pleased to say that the terms are now agreed and contracts are ready to be exchanged. The deals with these two businesses are subject to Cabinet approval today and also subject to a satisfactory planning permission being granted for their uses. As the Cabinet is aware, these are two separate conditions to be satisfied. I'm presenting this report today as a developer, and no comment is made either by myself verbally or in the report to express any view of the County Council as a planning authority. Any planning decision will be fully independent of the Council as landowner and developer and is a regulatory decision rather than a Cabinet approval. As previously mentioned, it has not been possible in the last 4 years to find an occupier that accords with the current allocated use on the site, and therefore we've had to search for other more viable and acceptable uses for the scheme. If, as per the 2017 planning office, the Office Plan Permission, the County Council is the determining planning authority, then Harborough District Council will be fully consulted, as will the Town Council and any local residents as part of the proper planning process. Harborough District Council's views of this departure from the current allocated use to a more commercially acceptable use will be taken into account, and any decision will be taken in accordance with planning law. As regards the development strategy, it's important that any proposed development is financially viable. This report outlined 4 possible options but recommends that we exchange contracts now with the 2 drive-through operators, submit a fresh planning application covering the whole of the site to include the storage unit and a parade of small commercial units, and if Cabinet approval and planning permission is granted, we build out the 2 drive-through units, and if the storage unit deal is concluded, we build that out too. The drive-through units will be kept for future much-needed revenue, and the built storage unit sold to the purchasing and procurement business that is looking to move there. This will be a capital receipt for the Council's investment fund. The smaller business units will only be developed when the property market recovers and the Council has sufficient capital resources. Overall, the drive-through units, the storage unit and the smaller units aimed at local businesses are expected to generate £376,000 in annual revenue and a capital receipt of £6 million for a capital investment of up to £8.2 million. The internal rate of return is somewhere between 10 and 11%, which is satisfactory from the fund's performance metrics. So subject to Cabinet approval today and planning permission, this scheme is a viable and commercially acceptable use of a council asset that has struggled to garner any interest for its current use and where the council has already invested in infrastructure works. The recommendation is therefore as of page 43 of the order paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Byron.
Yes, Leader. I'm very happy to move the resolution on this. Some people have taken the view and approached me on this and suggested that in fact this is not a good investment at this time. So I took some time out to review what we were doing, to discuss it with officers, and to look very, very carefully at the analysis. When you read the paper, you will see that really we've chosen an option here which will give us, as John has just said, a very worthwhile investment in the 2 restaurant units, which will give us a very good rate of return. And then also, of course, the opportunity, which we fully expect to happen, of building this additional unit, which eventually we'll sell on. So our net investment in the site will reduce to 2.2 million, which of course that makes that a much more acceptable sort of level of investment and with an ongoing income. So it does make sense at this time. As far as the technicalities go, because it's also been mentioned that it ought not to go to DCRB. Well, of course, it's a Regulation 3 planning proposal, so that's entirely appropriate, and it's entirely appropriate for them to deal with it as they see fit. But from a commercial point of view, from an overall interest of the County Council point of view, I'm happy that this is a good investment and something we should do at this time.
Thank you. Richard Shepherd.
Happy to second that, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, I also think it's a good deal and a great long-term investment moving forward. So we have no other speakers, so I shall be calling people in order. So the first person to ask for or against is Blake.
For.
Richard.
4.
Lee?
4.
Ivan?
4.
Trevor?
4.
Louise?
4.
And myself, I'm 4. So it was moved and seconded by Byron and Richard. Everybody voted in favour, so that's it. Thank you very much. Moving on now to agenda item 7, Leicestershire Youth Justice Strategic Plan 20 to 23, pages 57 to 88. The Cabinet's asked to agree the plan be submitted to the Council meeting on the 8th of July for approval. Please note we've received comments from Max on behalf of the Labour Group. These are attached to the order paper marked 7. Jane Moore, Director of Children and Family Services, will present the report. Then I'll go to Ivan, who has the Cabinet responsibility for this matter. So it's over to you, Jane Moore.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to present to the Cabinet the draft Leicestershire Youth Justice Strategic Plan, which covers the period of 2020 to 2023. The draft plan is attached to the appendix of this report, and we are seeking approval for the plan to be submitted to the County Council. So just by way of background, the Youth Offending Service is required by the Youth Justice Board to produce a Youth Justice Plan, and that is overseen by the Youth Offending Service Management Board. Following the review of the early help services in 2018-19, the Youth Offending Service is now integrated alongside the locality-based Children and Family Wellbeing Service and continues to operate well alongside that service. So the draft Youth Justice Plan provides an overview of how the Leicestershire Youth Offending Service will link into the partnership arrangements and deliver services in line with the national requirements that are set out by the Youth Justice Board. So the plan also sets out what the governance arrangements are for those and also the structure of that governance, the proposed reporting schedule to the Youth Offending Service Management Board, how the resources are to be allocated, and also the local draft performance measures, how practice will be developed, and also what the priorities and future risks are. So the 2023 plan has been introduced in a slightly different format, where we have now introduced some brief case studies. This was in response to the request made by Scrutiny Commission at its meeting last year when it considered the previous plan, and it was also as a result of some feedback from partner agencies as well through the Youth Offending Service Management Board. So the short case studies that are dotted throughout the plan do showcase the work of the Youth Offending Service, and they can be found on the pages in the plan under sections B and D. So the draft plan also highlights the continuing positive performance achieved by the Youth Offending Service, and that commitment to the intervention with young people at the earliest opportunity is reflected well in the performance of the Youth Offending Service in relation to the continued reduction of young people entering the criminal justice system compared to our national and regional partners, and also the rate of young people who are receiving custodial sentences continues to be low in Leicestershire compared to our regional and national comparators. So in terms of outcomes, the most significant area of challenge for the YOS remains the percentage of young people known to the Youth Offending Service in employment, education or training. And the plan focuses on how the YOS is planning to continue to work together with schools, the school inclusion team and other partner agencies to make progress in this area. And then section E of the plan focuses on the future risks, the most significant of which is assessed to be child criminal exploitation. So the plan was taken to Scrutiny Commission on the 8th of April, and we've included in it some of the feedback from Scrutiny Commission. Members welcomed the excellent work that takes place across the service and supported the work to support particularly those young people subject to youth referral orders and also first-time entrants, and welcomed that introduction of additional resources around psychologists and forensic psychologists. A key area of concern for scrutiny did relate to the exploitation of children, particularly vulnerable children, and although it was noted that all partners would focus on addressing this, it does remain a key risk area and will be heavily monitored in the revised plan. Members were also concerned that the service looked at the impact of isolation on some families during the current crisis, and also how this may affect potential releases of young people from custody. And obviously we're monitoring that in Leicestershire. We have detailed at paragraphs 26, 27 and 28 the amendments that have been made to the plan as a result of the consultation responses. So the Youth Justice Plan does set out a significant number of priorities which have been developed jointly with partners. And once agreement's given to those priorities, the Youth Offending Service with its partners will work through the plan for delivery within the existing resources of the Youth Offending Service. The performance measures that are set out in the plan, alongside with the operational procedures that will allow the YOS to deliver the plan, will be monitored both at a local yacht level as well as through reports on a quarterly basis to the Youth Offending Service Management Board. And whilst the plan is a 3-year plan, performance against that plan is monitored on an annual basis, as I said, through reports to the Youth Justice Board. So I'll end there and point to the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Ivan?
Thank you, Leader. In moving the recommendations on the order paper, I'd just like to draw Cabinet's attention to the context of the Youth Offending Service, the fact that the framework is from the Youth Justice Board, a national board, interpreted locally by the Youth Offending Service Management Board. And I think that although freedoms have been brought in to allow a 3-year plan, nevertheless that management board is still sensitive to the comments both of the Cabinet and of the Council as a whole. I attended the Scrutiny Commission meeting. Very happy to speak on behalf of the plan, which in my opinion is very good quality. It's an excellent service, and therefore I found it somewhat difficult to understand the comments from the Labour group in respect of it being an overview rather than a strategy. I would have thought that the Scrutiny Commission, if it had shared that viewpoint, would have made that comment in their reference to us as a Cabinet. When I look at the report itself, I'd like to draw members' attention to the paragraph 15, which for me is a really critical paragraph in the report. We reorganised 4 services into a single service, the Early Help Services, and that now has allowed the Youth Offending Service to work much more closely with youth and family workers, enabling a whole family approach to explore a young person's problems. I think that in the passage of time will be shown to be a very effective way forward. Paragraph 15 also shows the gain from working with partners and outlines the additional staff that at a time of cuts have been able to be put into the service as a result of our reorganisation. I am bothered, and I think Cabinet will also share my concern with paragraph 20. The section of the plan that focuses on future risks. Now it's taken in here to be linked to the increased understanding and influence of other child criminal exploitation. It's an unfortunate fact that there are people out there who see other human beings as people who can be exploited, used, manipulated, and have no conscience over doing that. For me, given the current state of play with coronavirus, paragraph 20 is one of the most important paragraphs in the report, and it may require some adjustments both in year and over the 3-year period. So the iteration of the report that you have in front of you at the moment, from my perspective, could be changed in the light of outcomes. I think I would stop at that point, Leader, and move the motion on the order paper.
Thank you for those comments, Ivan. Lee?
Thank you, Chairman. Happy that this is a good strategic plan, and I look forward to County Council approving this when it comes to the Council in July, so more than happy to second the recommendations on the order paper.
Thank you, Lee. So I have no other speakers, so I'm going to call people in order, either for or against. Blake?
For.
Richard?
4.
Trevor?
4.
Louise?
4.
Byron?
4.
The other Richard?
4.
And myself, 4. Thank you. That concludes that. Moving on to agenda item 8, which is the dates of council meetings for the remainder of 2021 and 21-22. These are on pages 89 to 90. If everyone was happy with these, they'll be referred to the next council meeting on July the 8th for approval. So having said that, I will move the motion on the order paper. Blake?
4. Agreed. Second.
Yeah, very good. So Blake seconding. So I'll call you in order again. Richard?
4.
Lee?
4.
Ivan?
4.
Trevor?
4.
Louise?
4.
Byron?
4.
The other Richard?
4.
Okay, that concludes that. So we now move on to agenda item 9. Items are referred from overview and scrutiny. There are none. Agenda item 10. Items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent. There are none. Therefore, that brings the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for your attendance and your contributions. Goodbye.